Good evening and welcome to the City Council of the City of Moreno Valley Community Services District, City as successor agency for the Community Redevelopment Agency of the City of Moreno Valley Housing Authority, Moreno Valley Public Financing Authority, Board of Library Trustees, and the Moreno Valley Community Foundation Board of Directors. The City Council receives a separate stipend for CSD meetings. I now call this meeting to order on March 12, 2024 at 6:02 p.m. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by Councilman Delgado, and we have no invocation this evening.
Please join me by placing your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God.
Next, I'll go ahead and turn to our city clerk. Madam Clerk, a roll call, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Baca Santa Cruz,
Here.
Councilmember Delgado,
Here, ma'am.
Councilmember Marcus. Here. Mayor Pro Tem Bernard,
Here.
and Mayor Cabrera.
Here. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Staff introductions, please.
Jane Halstead, City Clerk.
Patty Rodriguez, Senior Deputy City.
Steve Quintanilla, City Attorney.
Mike Lee, City Manager.
Brian Mohan, Assistant City Manager over Administration.
Sean Kelleher, Acting Assistant City Manager over Development Services.
Lana Jimenez, Chief Financial Officer, City Treasurer.
Melissa Walker, Director of Public Works.
Jeremy Bubnick, Director of Parks and Community Services.
Robert Cardenas, Human Resources Director.
Cruz Esparza, Economic Development and Housing Director.
Lieutenant Tim Browse, representing Captain Ken Reichel, Chief of Police.
Good evening, staff. It's always a pleasure to be here with you. And next we will, actually, I skipped something. The very important roll call. Madam Clerk, roll call, please. Oh, did we? For the council?
We just did that.
We did. Okay. As you can tell, I'm tired today. I'm sorry. We'll go ahead and move into public comments on matters that are on the agenda only. Pursuant to the Brown Act, public comments shall be limited to only those items on the study session agenda. Each person shall be allowed a total of 3 minutes to comment on each item on the study session agenda. The council, however, may reduce the total amount of time for all speakers in order to allow all speakers the opportunity to speak. A reminder that the city is offering Spanish translation services if anyone is interested in this feature. La ciudad actualmente ofrece servicios de traducción al español. Si alguien está interesado, por favor nos avisan. Finally, in order to preserve the meeting decorum, council and staff will not respond to questions or comments during public comment. City Clerk, do we have any requests to speak?
We have none, Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We'll go ahead and move into item A1, which is financial reports for citizens, and that is a report by the City Manager's Office.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. A1 is basically going to be two presentations in which they'll go over various reports that have been created for residents, specifically residents, as they are scaling down the amount of information in the budget and within the annual comprehensive financial report. The first one is going to go over the Citizens Guide. This presentation, in essence, will cover the condensed budget report created specifically for the residents. We do call it Citizens Guide. This resident-specific format was created in 2017 based on the budget for fiscal years 2017, 18 and 2018-19. Since then, this particular format has been presented to a multitude of several stakeholder groups and organizations since 2017, and it provides the residents with a summary of the key indicators included in the very large adopted budget report, which is over 1,100 pages. This particular this particular slide is the budget development building blocks. Not going to go over every single bulleted point within the slides, but some key things. This is the 12th consecutive year in which we've had structurally balanced budgets. So with this current budget cycle, which covers fiscal year 23-24 and 2024-25, our city is proud of its award-winning budget and financial management procedures, as well as conservative, responsible fiscal safeguards. In this budget process, we continue to work towards spending funds to maintain our residents' quality of life and to meet the goals of strategic plan, which is the Momentum Moval, while continuing to maintain our structurally balanced budgets. Speaking of Momentum Moval, the 6 strategic priorities that make up that particular plan, which was originally adopted by council in 2016 to be effective 2017 through 2023. It's a 5-year life, which this particular council had reapproved the strategic priorities to be continued for budgetary use long about March of 2023. The city has shown its commitment of continuing to reflect the community's priorities through our Momentum Moval strategic plan, including these 6 priorities. The budget ensures that the Moreno Valley residents continue to receive services which make our city a great place to live, work, and raise a family. Although this particular slide has very small writing on it, these slides will be made available as part of the administrative record, and they'll be able to be received by the city clerk through Public Records Act requests. But basically what this shows is that for fiscal year 23-24, the general fund continues to remain balanced with revenues and expenditures of $152.8 million. Revenue projections are based on the most current economic data available, and budgeted appropriations reflect ongoing efforts to achieve efficiencies. All of the department heads here, they go through their particular budgets when we create the adopted budget cycle, which is a biennial cycle or 2-year cycle, to carefully evaluate its expenditures, seeking to at least maintain services while reducing costs wherever feasible. And city staff continue to monitor economic indicators for any changes and report back to council on a quarterly basis, which was agreed upon in our budgetary policy. The general fund is comprised of several revenue sources. However, the 3 main sources account for over 68% of the budget total. Those include property tax, sales tax, and utility users tax. And each revenue type is impacted by different activity cycles and economic pressures. The largest revenue is our property tax, and this is actually a sample tax bill from an actual residence within the city of Moreno Valley. The net taxable value of this particular sample is $293,739, and we'll get more into that. But really, I just want to key on the general purpose, or what we call ad valorem amount, which is 1% of the total value of the property. In this case, it is $2,937. Of that 1%, the ad valorem amount, it breaks down into a multitude of education, water and other services, and county general agencies to the tune of 89%. The city of general fund only receives 11.09%. So if you calculate that all the way through, in essence, what the city receives off of this bill of $2,937 is only $326. For those residents out there that are looking at this tax bill that this particular person or individual received is actually for $7,292. That is due to the fact that everything outside of the general purpose line item, or the 1% ad valorem, is all of the fixed charges and other charges from other jurisdictions other than the city of Moreno Valley General Fund. The largest is actually from Moreno Valley Unified School District, which is $3,383 in this particular instance. So when residents ask you, where are all my my property tax dollars going because we have potholes, because this and that is not done, you can now state that on average, we receive less than $400, $500 from any given house, depending on the value of their home. The other, the next largest revenue is our sales tax. The chopped up bill on the left-hand side there kind of shows how a $1 of our sales tax is actually allocated. So of our current sales tax in Moreno Valley of 7.75, every dollar that is generated in the city of Moreno Valley, the general fund only receives 13 cents. That supports all of our local services, including public safety and infrastructure. The illustration actually depicts that how 87% of a dollar is actually split between the general fund, the state general fund, the state local revenue fund, the county transportation funds, and state local public safety fund. The city actually, in this budgetary cycle, is budgeted to receive $37.5 million. This is based on the analysis of the trends in the year-to-date tax receipts, macroeconomic conditions, and the examination of local business data. We also consult with HDL, which is one of the premier consultants in sales tax and property tax. And what we are seeing is that for future years, our sales tax revenue growth is continuing to show signs of flattening and actually reductions in a lot of certain industry segments. In fact, third quarter of 23 compared to third quarter of 22, almost every industry segment was a reduction. And the reason why you're asking, well, gee, that was third quarter, that was 23, that was September 23, is because sales tax data lags by 1 quarter. So we haven't even received information on fourth quarter yet because it's just being released by CDTFA. The third largest is our utility users tax, and this is actually one of our revenues that is the most significant because it is very consistent. We receive around 15 to now 17 million, but it is very consistent and has been consistent for years. This utility users tax was voter approved and is a 5.75% charge on utility activity in Moreno Valley. The tax is assessed on all utilities, such as electricity, energy, water, sewer, cable, wireless, and telephone charges. In 2008, the UUT, by direction of the City Council, was actually reduced from 6% to 5.75% and modernized the definitions of taxable services. Since that time, like I stated, it's been the most consistent and actually has assisted us through the Great Recession. Again, it was very stable because even during the Great Recession, everybody is still utilizing utilities. Even during the pandemic, we didn't see reductions in this particular revenue. Now when we flip to the other side of the equation and we start taking a look at expenses, city staffing is one of the largest expenses along with contract services because we do contract out for public safety, for law enforcement and fire services. But in this particular table is quite interesting. So in 2011, the city employed 426 career staff members. But again, due to the Great Recession, that number fell drastically as shown in that particular table or bar graph. Per the adopted budget for this budget cycle of 23, 24, 24, 25, the city only employs 402. So we're still not up to where we were back in 2011. The ability to maintain low staffing levels is only due to the strategic investments in software to increase our productivity. As compared to the surrounding cities, this other infographic on the lower right-hand side compares the city to other surrounding cities. And as we focus on the efficiencies that I had spoke about in the strategic investments of software, it allows the Moreno Valley to be staffed at half of the average staffing in order to continue to provide savings to the public and deploy services rather than salaries. So Moreno Valley here is 1.6 employees per 1,000 capita. And this shows 328 employees because we have to exclude police, fire, water, sewer, airport, crossing guards, and animal control to be apples to apples in this comparison. The average between all of these cities that are listed here is 2.9. And Riverside, which is next door, is 4.6. So as you can see, we run a very lean model in order to deploy and invest all of the revenues in actual services to our residents. When we look at our contracted services for police and fire, the police services represent about 40.5% of the general fund expenditures. The County Board of Supervisors, who oversees the contract, the County Sheriff's Department, initially announced impacts that could result in contract increases of about 7.5%. So basically the process is the county sheriff submits their budget, and then the County Board of Supervisors get to discuss that, and then ultimately, through the contractual arrangement, what would be allocated to the cities. And so as part of that, that's why you see the last two bars in the bar graphs at 7.5% is, 7.5% for 23, 24, 24, 25. What that actually represents is about $3 million in budget. And so as you can see, every 2-year cycle is an additional $3 million that we're budgeting for. Luckily, as the rates have come in, as you can see from 2018-19, this was based on the 2018 election for the current sheriff. Since then, there have been significant savings in the rate that we are allocated. But because of the county's financial discussions and the Board of Supervisors being able to tack on whatever they would like to tack on, and their prior communication that it could be as high as 7.5%, we take an ultra-conservative approach in budgeting 7.5 as opposed to a lesser rate. For fire staffing, fire services represents 18.9% of the general fund expenditures. Services are provided out of 7 stations and located throughout the city with the support of 87 firefighters. As you can see, there has been an increase since 22-23. That is due to the new squad that came through part of this budgetary cycle. A new squad requires 6 new employees, and so not only do we have the apparatus, the squad itself, there are 6 new employees that were part of that particular budget. 23-24 fire department budget exceeds $29 million in total, and based on the current population, the cost is equal to about $136 per person, or $569 per household. So when you're talking about breaking it down per capita, property tax doesn't even cover our public safety. And so that's where a lot of residents will say, well, you know, my property tax pays for public safety, my property tax pays for the roads and so forth. And so that's where I'm kind of providing you some information as to property tax doesn't pay for everything. Also, the general fund infrastructure and streets, as part of this the budget cycle, we have $27 million in various funding sources that will go towards the pavement rehab and annual street maintenance. Interesting to note, though, as part of the current pavement condition index, we need about $10 million per year just to continue maintaining at that same level. which prior to recent conversations in which we're going to go out and redo the PCI, previous PCI was in the 60 percentile range. So again, we try and look for additional funding to ensure that we're at 10 million or more, just to maintain our current PCI. Along with general fund infrastructure and capital improvement plan, we have over $51 million in the 2-year cycle that is going towards the CIP. The biggest thing here is, if you recall from when the CIP came before council in June for approval, that there was over 1.2 billion of unfunded projects. So this is barely a dent in the larger scope that still needs to be funded. Community engagement, we always try to involve as much of the community that is available and that would like to participate. As part of all of our budget cycles since 2017, in the preparation of it, we have utilized prior feedback as well as input for service priorities through electronic and mailed requests of surveys. The preparation of this particular adopted budget required careful planning to effectively balance community feedback with the city's strategic priorities and commitments. If you recall, this is the second budget cycle in which the priorities align, the residential priorities align with our strategic plan. They have requested maintaining 911 emergency response times, maintain safe and clean public areas, repair potholes, local streets and roads, improve senior services, address homelessness, and enhance recreation, youth programs and facilities. Based on the budget assumptions for this particular budget cycle, if you look at this particular, as part of the budget assumptions, we look at the expenditures to ensure that we can cover the increasing services related to public safety, that revenue growth is still consistent and not dipping, but obviously sales tax is starting to decline. Economic development is the key to balancing the budget. Without economic development, we wouldn't have balanced budgets, and that's depicted in this particular graph here. So the blue line is revenues, and the gray line are expenses. And the dotted lines out to the right-hand side at 25, 26, going through 2028, 2029, is actually what our deficit would be if the economic development engine was actually to stop. We wouldn't have all of the charges for services related to community development activity downstairs. Economic futures and concerns, obviously we look at a lot of different things, what's going on with the state, what's going on with Riverside County and the increases to key public services such as law enforcement or fire protection services, and the fact that we must continue to reinvest in upgrading the city's aging infrastructure. Again, that goes back to the $1.2 million worth of, or $1.2 billion worth of CIP projects, as well as our guarantee to debt service payments related to public safety building, as well as other debt related to MVU and other revenue lease bonds. With any budget, we always try and advertise our higher MOVAL, and so here are the higher MOVAL for a grad and for a veteran. And then I'm available for any questions, along with these are the two landing pages for the budget and for the Citizens Guide specifically.
Thank you very much, ACM Mohan. Appreciate the presentation. And at this time, I'll go ahead and turn up to the dais. If there are any questions or comments, please go ahead and raise your hand here. First up, we have Councilmember Delgado.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Brian, great job, great presentation on our finances. And it does look like we do have a balanced budget. I know there was a comment last week that why can't we balance our budget, but it looks very, very good. couple questions on the revenue side. One, you said that based on the value of the home, the sales tax of that, the property tax gets assessed to the city. The market's up and down. So at what point during the year or at when does this assessment take place? So, you know, in January, my house could be worth, you know, 200,000. In December, it could be worth 300,000. So when does that get assessed to get a good property value or a good tax value?
So you're right. The assessor assesses the valuation. That goes to the property tax collector, and the property tax collector then collects taxes on that assessment. So as the assessor is changing annually, we're going to be getting an increase in property taxes just because we would assume the ad valorem amount is going up. Typically what happens, right? Because it's usually about 2% per year growth. Now, in certain years in which we had in the 2000s, we were actually seeing Prop 8 elections in which the assessor was reducing the assessed valuation for people who had just purchased their homes 2005, 2006, and so forth. So that's where, you know, certain jurisdictions were actually losing the property tax that they would have typically received. For the most part, all assessors within the Inland Empire, those Prop 8 elections that were made back then have all corrected themselves, and everybody is kind of back to prior to that level. Where we see the most growth in property tax is when a person sells their home. So, because Prop 13 isn't saying, well, you only have 2% increase per year per Prop 13. So if you sell your home, say you had an assessed value at $250,000, you go sell your home at $600,000. The new assessed value is the $600,000. So now the city is benefiting from the turnover of the actual title changes.
Thank you for that. And then you said the utility tax is the most consistent in the city. And why is that? I mean, because they go up for the residents, right? The taxes for utilities go up or down or based on our utilities. So why is it so consistent, and why can't all the others be as consistent?
Well, everybody is using utilities. Everybody has gas, everybody has electricity. Those are the two largest, water, wastewater. So from that standpoint, there's consistency among the usage. And it's 5.75 on the usage. Now, there are increases and so forth with utility companies and so forth, and we do benefit from that. But it has just always been very consistent. Even when people cut the cable, it's still been very consistent.
That's kind of interesting on that. And then one last thing, unexpected expenses and mandates by the state. And I know that there's a few that have been that have come down and said, hey, cities, local jurisdictions, you're going to implement this new law or this new statute or whatever it is. And by the way, we're not going to give you any money for it. How's that affecting Moreno Valley? And I know it affects us because obviously there's unexpected and not in the budget, but how is that affecting us?
A multitude of ways, but what you're talking about are unfunded cost mandates. And there's two unfunded mandates. One in which the legislature identifies that it is an unfunded mandate, and they make it as part of the SB 90 calculation, meaning that we're able to implement that particular unfunded mandate, and we're able to report on an annual basis to the state controller and try and get reimbursed for it. Then there's legislation that just puts burden on the local jurisdiction, and it's not part of SB 90. And that's truly the most hurtful unfunded mandate, because we can't even be able to get recouped. Now, for the SB 90 items, the state owes local jurisdictions billions of dollars, and they haven't paid local jurisdictions since maybe 2010. So even when they had the $100 billion in which they were coming up to their GAN limit and had to be able to provide some of that back in various credits and so forth, they didn't pay the local jurisdiction all of the unfunded mandates that are due them. So we do not include those in the budgets, and therefore it's just nice when we do receive a little bit of money,
If we do.
if we do.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councilman. Next up, we have Councilmember Marquez.
Thank you, Mayor. Brian, let's go back on the utility tax. You had mentioned utility tax covers the services like cable. Now, that hasn't been charged on utility tax ever since the utility tax was put on, as a budget item. When was that happening, and what's the increase for those extra items?
Sorry. So back when, at the direction of City Council and the voters, it went from 6% to 5.75%. The clarification of the definitions of what utilities to include in the utility users tax was clearly defined. And so that was way back in, I believe it was 2008, in which this slide showed.
And that was a voter's approval?
Yes.
Okay, so anybody complains, that's where they have to go to, right?
Yes, anybody can go to Ballotpedia and take a look at the 2008 November ballot for Moreno Valley and see that there was, I believe it was Measure P at the time, and it passed, I think, in the 70th percentile to reduce it from 6% to 5.75% and clearly define what is inclusive.
One other question. TOT tax that was implemented several years ago for the hotels.
Yes.
The TOT tax not at 100% for public safety, was it?
No, it was a general purpose TOT. It was not a special tax, so it would have had to have passed with a voter approval of 50+1. It goes into the general fund and is part of the general fund revenues that I stated was 152.8 million to go against the services and expenditures of 152.8 million. So it's all inclusive of all of our general fund services. And that particular tax, I believe it was in 2013, went to 13%. And that's what our TOT rate is right now.
And the hotel tax that we recently approved for sales tax or additional fees tax for the hotels, has that helped at all?
So the additional hotels that have been coming online over the last several years, yes. The TOT tax has increased significantly because of, I believe it's been 4 or 5 hotels that have come online over the last 3 or 4 years.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Brian.
Yep.
Thank you, Councilman. Next up, Councilmember Baca Santa Cruz.
Back to the utility. What about streaming services? Are they also included, like Netflix or Cinemax, whatever?
So that's the difficulty when I said cut the cable, and I'm surprised that it's still consistent. So there's a few things. If we don't know those services are being actually in the city of Moreno Valley, they're not going to be charged the UUT. So streaming is very difficult. Traditional Verizon and so forth, they would be charged UUT. It's the streaming that is difficult.
So Netflix is cracking down on that. They know where you are now, so will we be able to get in on that?
The other thing that's unique about UUT and emerging technology, anytime you have emerging technology and technology changes that wasn't already referenced within a prior voter-approved tax, I'd have to go back and see if we were able to actually start trying to crack down on streaming services. But again, it comes down to cost-benefit analysis, because a lot of times you can spend a lot of administrative efforts for little money. And so I know the platform isn't there yet for us to go that route, but I'd definitely have to check the legality of whether or not we could.
What about our rate? How does it compare to other cities? Do they charge utility taxes, most other cities?
It really is dependent. There is no consistency from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and there's no consistency as to whether or not it is an annual or 5-year or no sunset type of tax. It's really dependent on as to what prior councils had approved for voters and voters approving it. But I would say for the most part, it's more common than not common. And I have not done a comparison to other surrounding cities.
What about staffing levels? I see they're really low compared to other cities. I know we've made some recent hiring. Do we plan to continue to increase, or are we able to offer the same level of services at a lower staffing level?
Well, that's really a policy decision. They're out of necessity during the pandemic. We did make a conscious decision along with council to not increase the number of staff, especially at a city management level. Not until February of '22, when council made some investments in public safety and quality of life efforts. We had roughly about 25 positions that were approved for additional maintenance and operation teams, additional park maintenance teams. There were several park, not superintendents, park rangers. There were some additional CBAT, additional motos, and so forth that were included during that time frame. The question for council would be, would you rather increase positions or services? So there's a fine line with the methodology of adding bodies, does it add services? And long ago, your predecessors, my predecessors, had decided to invest in technology to make us more operationally efficient. And at this particular point in time, we are able to meet those operational efficiencies with the services that we're providing now. It's all about what budget resources you have and the ability to maintain those services as we move forward. I've already mentioned that there's certain taxes that are already starting to see reductions, and that will potentially be a conversation here in the very near future as to how we still maintain our current employment levels along with our current service levels.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Very informative report.
Thank you. And I see Councilman Marquez has another question.
Another question, yeah. One more. What are we doing with the sales tax? For example, when there's a sale from Amazon, from our warehouse, where they mark it down taxable. How does that work? And I know we've gone through this quite a bit, but maybe the public would like to know. Who gets that share, or who decides to get that share of sales tax?
Without naming specific businesses within our city, because sales tax information is actually confidential, so I can't name any businesses' names. But based on CDTFA records, there was a corporate structure change with one of the large e-commerce providers, and it changed how sales tax was allocated based on the fulfillment centers. They used to be allocated to the county pools, and then that goes into the county pools and then is allocated to all the jurisdictions within a given county. With that particular corporate change, it changed the ownership of who owned the facility for the fulfillment centers. And based on CDTFA law, it now shifted those sales tax dollars from the county pools to the jurisdiction in which that particular business was in. And so right now, we do have a fulfillment center or two related to that particular e-commerce vendor. And so we are benefiting 100% of those dollars at this particular point in time. But as you know, there is an effort by other California cities who do not have fulfillment centers and who have lost those dollars through the county tax pool allocation, in which are pushing Cal cities and legislators to properly reallocate those dollars in an equitable manner. And so previously, the 482 cities had been tackling this. Now, just so you know, there's actually a 483rd city. It was just incorporated this week. So we continue to have conversations. I'm heavily involved with Cal Cities and working groups and so forth on this matter.
And I just want to put a shout out to Mike and your staff for watching over the city on this issue, because I know that there's some cities that fought all the way up to Sacramento, and you guys went beyond, and we were able to become a little more wealthy with that. So
I can recall it was a team effort, so it wasn't just staff. We are on various boards, but also the elected officials. When you guys go up to the League of California Cities, it was a tremendous lobbying effort that a lot of you participated in. We're able to swing that vote back in our favor, I think 3 or 4 years ago. So we're going to continue that fight because e-commerce is huge, and that's why a lot of cities are fighting for these e-commerce facilities. Thank you.
yeah. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Brian, Mike.
Thank you. And just a couple of comments and maybe a couple questions as well for you guys. And actually, to piggyback on that topic, does the city of Moreno Valley have authority when it comes to making any laws or passing ordinances or resolutions that could affect the way that these corporations structure their tax mechanisms and how they allocate that funding, such as this one particular entity? Are there things that the city can do legislatively or policy-wise to affect that, or are those things completely out of our scope?
I would answer that based on in the past and currently, yes. But the state legislators over the last 5 years, along with this current session, continue to attack those very mechanisms that a local jurisdiction would have in order to provide economic development. And therefore, I do see this as one of those areas in which those mechanisms will go away, whether through state legislation or through the sales tax working group and Cal Cities, stating that they're going to put a moratorium on those economic development mechanisms, and any mechanism that is currently in place or agreement that is in place will sunset after a certain time frame. That's where I really see that going. So putting one in place now would be almost detrimental to the city, because we wouldn't be able to enforce it because the legislation most likely will change in this particular session.
Got it. Thank you. And on sales taxes, is there, we all pretty much know that over the past several years, there's been a increased transition to e-commerce, online shopping, brick and mortar suffering, retail is suffering. Is there any general consensus with economists or in your realm in finance of how this trend is going to look moving forward? Is there going to be a continued decrease in sales taxes because of this continued transition to online shopping and e-commerce? Or is there any kind of general consensus of 5 years, 10 years down the line, what kind of headwinds or tailwinds are we going to be facing?
So everybody here in the well reads their respective expertise literature that comes out of their technical committees and technical organizations. Some of the things that we're already seeing are articles about how people are already backing off of the e-commerce and wanting to get back into certain areas of brick and mortar. Not the traditional malls, not the traditional brick and mortar, but there's, you know, mixed use and so forth. They're already clamoring for that. And so that's come through various articles and so forth. I don't think that there's any one article or any one economist that is going to say at this particular point in time, here's the cliff. Usually economists, in order to keep their jobs, say, well, it's about 18 months, about 18 months. That's when the recession will hit. Well, I would say that right now, from our current review of our sales tax, we're already kind of seeing some softening in some recessionary indicators. I don't see a cliff, but again, those type of outlooks, 5-10 years as to what any one economic development will be better than the other. Obviously, the economic crew knows better than I do, but we're already starting to see articles in which people are already getting back into mixed-use areas where there's restaurants and movie theaters and so forth. So,
Very good, very good. And my next one is more of a comment, actually. I'll talk more about this in our regular meeting next week, but I just got back from a conference, and part of that conference, there was a pitch competition. I was very fortunate to be one of the judges, and we heard 6 different pitches from technology companies, and one of them, the name of the company or startup is MD Ally. M as in Mary, D as in David, Ally, A-L-L-Y. And in a nutshell, what they do is they provide AI-enabled software to police departments and fire departments to augment the dispatch process. And part of what they do is improving response times, reducing impact on staff, getting residents more accurate assistance, making sure that the right entity is responding to the particular call. And they're saving a lot of money for jurisdictions in the process. So when we're talking about, you know, technology and innovation and implementing that, using that to maybe not have to hire more people, right? That's one thing that they actually won. Out of the 6 pitches, MD Ally was the one that won. They got a $10,000 check, and now they're going to the final competition that's going to happen in Kansas at the U.S. Conference of Mayors Conference. So we'll see how that goes. But just wanted to mention that in case it's something that we're not looking into yet. Hopefully we can look into it, and you know, if it works for us, if it makes sense, then maybe it's something we can go into. So more of a comment there. On real estate, you guys already touched on that, but you know, I'm hoping and I'm maintaining my optimism that during the pandemic, we saw a huge spike in transactions, right? People were coming out here from, I mean, Riverside County, again, just as a refresher, during the pandemic, those 2 years of the height of the pandemic, Riverside County was the only county, besides Maricopa County, but Riverside County was the only county in California that saw positive net migration. When everyone was leaving, the great migration out of California, which is true, there was only one county that people were coming to, that was Riverside County, Moreno Valley and the surrounding areas. And with that came increased transactions, increased property tax assessments. And over the past year and a half or so, the market has slowed down. Transactions have been down. It hasn't crashed or anything, but it has significantly slowed down relative to COVID. And so now, today actually, inflation, the Fed is still trying to fight inflation, and it's still not where we need it to be for them to start making cuts in terms of the federal funds rate. But once that does happen, which we'll see, hopefully it's sometime at the end of this year or beginning of next year, we'll start seeing an uptick in real estate transactions again, because affordability will improve and there'll be more buyers going into the market, and that hopefully will help us in terms of our revenue and tax collection. Again, more of a comment here. And then lastly, there was a slide on there that briefly mentioned the higher grad and higher up programs that we have implemented over the past couple of years. And one of the things that hopefully we can explore and entertain is in regards to the homeless situation and how our city is responding to addressing the homeless situation, maybe starting a new hire a program that could be called, for example, hire a homeless neighbor program, right? Where we are paying, just like we do for the hire a veteran and hire a grad, where we pay the business a certain amount of money. I think it's $1,000 per employee and then $1,000 for the business. Maybe we can replicate that as a pilot program just to see, if it works, if it's successful, and it won't necessarily cost us any money. If there are any unused funds that are already allocated in our budget for the hire a grad and hire a veteran program, if there's any unused funding there, maybe we can pull that and create this new hire a homeless neighbor or hire an unhoused neighbor program for maybe 6 months or 12 months as a pilot and see if it works to augment, our response to the homeless situation. So again, more of a comment, but just a few things there. So I already said a lot of things, and I think I'll hit the pause button right there. Are there any further questions or comments from the dais? Okay. I don't see any, so we can go ahead and move into the second item. Thank you once again, ACM Mohan, for that report. And we'll go ahead and move into, oh, you have a second one. We'll move into the second one, which is called Political Science / Public Administration 101. And I'll turn it back to you, Brian.
Actually, before we migrate to A2, there's actually a second part of A1. So as part of the financial report for residents or citizens, another condensed report is the popular annual financial report. So if you don't mind going through this first.
Absolutely.
Okay. So this particular report is a condensed version of our ACFR, which is the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. And that report is basically our results of our fiscal year end. So we just talked about budget, and now these are the actuals of what we were just discussing. And again, this is for June 30, 2023, because that is the last audited results of our financials. So in essence, this report basically was developed and created through requirements of the GFOA. Not every entity does this, but if an entity is developing a condensed version of their annual comprehensive financial report, it's going to be off of these particular regulations. And the GFOA has given an award of Outstanding Achievement in Popular Annual Financial Reporting to Moreno Valley for June 30th of 22. Again, keep in mind that these are year events, so that's why it's 22 as opposed to not 23. Our 23 is actually currently under review, and I would assume that it will also meet all the requirements for an award. In order to receive the award, the government unit must publish a PAFR, the contents of which to conform to program standards of creativity, presentation, understandability, and reader appeal. An award for the PAFR is valid for a period of 1 year. And again, we believe that this particular PAFR will be successful when we submit. This particular infographic just provides residents with information about the city. So to go hand in hand with some of the things that you were mentioning, average household values is $532,000. Now keep in mind, this was as of June 30, 23. Some of these have already changed just because the economic indicators change and fluctuate so quickly. The average household income at this time was $96,932. We already know that it's over 100 at this particular point in time. As well as parks has 551 acres, 33 parks. And so there's just a multitude of various infographics that the residents can learn about how many things a particular department did. When you look at the general fund reserves, this is actually keys the resident into our financial status as well as ability to muster any economic windfalls or downturns. So the fund balance here is broken down into a multitude of categories. Now, this is all predicated off of your approval of Policy 3.11, which is Fund Balance and Reserve Policy. That particular policy requires the general fund to set aside a certain percentage of the future budgetary expenditures to ensure that if for some reason the economy was to falter, that we have money to have that ability to continue our service levels and processes. So here you have the Economic Uncertainty Reserve, the Operating Reserve Stabilization, and the unassigned. All of them are above 20 million and various other categories as well. The total fund balance within the general fund is over 98 million. The Economic Uncertainty Reserve was established for the purposes of providing funds to be used during times of severe economic distress, such as a recessionary period, state raids on local resources, or other impactful unforeseen events which greatly diminish the financial ability for the city to deliver core services. The Operating Reserve Stabilization, that particular item was established for providing funds for an urgent catastrophic event or a major disaster that affects the safety of residents, employees, property, earthquake, wildfires, terrorist attacks, and so forth. The unassigned is established to protect the city against cash flow needs. So of those three revenues that we stated, obviously UUT was very consistent. Property tax isn't. It's not even consistent with when we receive it. You pay your property taxes in December and April. We receive it in December, January, and April and May. So we have to have a significant amount of budgetary or of funds to be able to have a cash flow to process the expenditures, which kind of appear consistent throughout any given month. So at the third month of the year, you would expect to be at least a third through your expenditure budgets, unlike revenues. A little bit more on the general fund revenues as we migrate away from the reserves. Again, this was the results of what we were discussing: property tax, sales tax, utility users tax, and so forth. So we actually took in over $163 million worth of revenues in that particular year. Thing that is interesting when you look at the breakdown: property tax 29%, sales tax 22%, utility users 10%, charges for services, or sorry, 12%, charges for services 10%. The nice thing that auditors want to see, or investors and purchasers of our bonds want to see, or credit rating agencies want to see, is that you don't have so much of one revenue in one category, because if that category falters, then you're significantly impacted. So we have a very good mix of our revenues. Property tax, you're looking at roughly over $47 million in 22-23 that we have received. And again, this gives you a little bit of history as to property tax and how property taxes are determined and so forth. But you can see, like you guys have been talking about, we've seen consistent growth with various title changes and so forth over the years, as well as the typical 2% growth that you would see from a Prop 13 assessed valuation increase. Sales tax, again, this is how it breaks down in the allocation and so forth. The biggest thing here is in 22-23, we actually collected $36.2 million. When we go to the other side of the equation and we start taking a look at expenditures, we categorize them in public safety, general government, community development, public works. A little bit different than the budgetary document, but $161 million in expenditures. If you recall, we received $163 million in revenues, so we had about a little over $1 million worth of fund balance there. The other thing that the audited financials do is they look at changes in net position. So when you're looking at the government-wide and business type activities and what total your primary government, you're really looking at billions of dollars in net position because you have all of those assets and so forth. Remember how I mentioned we have $1.2 billion worth of unfunded projects? Well, that's because we have billions of dollars worth of assets that need to be serviced and maintained and so forth. So in essence, that's what the CIP is a lot of capital maintenance that is required on our assets. This basically just shows net position over time, and it shows residents and users of our financials that we are fairly healthy at this particular point in time. It also then shows Community Services District as part of our annual comprehensive financial report. We have our government-wide, we have all of the main governmental components, and we do have Community Services District. When you guys sit through an annexation for 2021-01, that is park maintenance, you're putting on your CSD hat and taking off your city hat. So therefore, we have to show these as separate entities and so forth that come with this, as well as we have to report our district separately for Prop 218 requirements. So this basically just shows that of what we're getting ready to do come next week council meeting is initiate the levy proceedings. So this shows that from fiscal year 21 through 23, we've been receiving taxes related to these CSDs, and they exceed $15 million, as well as the various expenditures. A lot of this goes towards Parks and Community Services, which is Zone A, and then you have various landscaping districts and other districts in which you guys will all hear next Tuesday, because we do have 2014-01 and 2014-02 coming through to initiate proceedings. Again, additional districts within the community CSD umbrella. Again, this is 2014-01 here. We also have the Moreno Valley electric utility. So this is the non-governmental, and this would be a proprietary entity as part of our financials. This basically just shows the revenues and expenditures and the net position. As you can see, there's been growth both in revenues and expenditures. The MVU is healthy. We're hoping that in the near future, it will be able to stand on its own and not need the support of potential general fund backing. And with that, we will be able to remove some of the reserves that we have as part of MVU. And then, again, this is total net position. You can see the graph is very similar to what we were seeing with our reserves, but in essence, they increased from $71 to $83 million in a net position, meaning that they roughly had a surplus over the last year, and so they are sitting well positioned for the future. Keep in mind with the Moreno Valley utility, there are certain projects that are on the CIP that will utilize some of this surplus in order to purchase infrastructure as we continue to move east and be ready for development on the east side. This is a quick tutorial on long-term debt and shows you what the long-term debt is from a an ACFR position, so an annual comprehensive financial report position. It is not actual debt completely, because there's other things in there that is not actual bonds. So we get in there and you have lease liabilities, SPIDA, compensated absences, and other liabilities. Again, this is just glossary for residents and users of the PAFR to understand some of the technical terms that are in the document itself. And with that, I'm available for any questions, along with a link of our financial report landing page, as well as the PAFR specific link.
Thank you once again, Brian. And we have some questions from Councilmember Marquez.
Yeah, thank you on that, Brian. On our reserves, when was the last time we ever had to use them?
Last year. The reason why is council made a business or policy decision to utilize some of the reserves for the senior center expansion. That amount of money, which I believe was 3.3 million of the 4.5 million that was part of the senior center expansion, has already been paid back. So we received some revenues from the March JPA. It was unexpected revenue from a sale of property in which the JPA members received their allocated percentage. And so that amount of money went to replenish the fund balance that was used for the senior center expansion. That's the only time that I am aware of since I've been here at the city that the city has used fund balance or reserves.
And is it true that we have to replace whatever we use in a certain amount of time?
Yes.
What's that, a year, 2 years? I'm just
So
curious.
the policy states that there must be a repayment plan. At the time council approves the use of fund balance or reserves, there has to be a repayment plan that is also approved with the use. And so, in essence, that is the requirement. I believe it's a 2 or 3 year component as far as the payback.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Alrighty. Are there any further questions or comments from the dais? I don't see any. Before I move on, are there any additional items on A1? I see a nod. Okay. Thank you very much. And I guess I'll just let you continue into item A2.
Thank you, Mayor. So as we move into I2, which is titled Political Science Public Administration 101, this was a fun exercise, but based on various comments that we hear from residents at the podium, as well as comments that you receive and you bring into the city manager's office, letting us know what your constituents are commenting on, it appeared that there was an instructional method that was needed to understand the various jurisdictions of all the governmental agencies and units within federal, state, county, local. And so it was determined that we would create a quick study session to go over that. Excuse me. So political science, public administration, in essence, it's a scientific study of politics, and it's a social science along with the system of governance and power and the analysis of political activities, political thought, political behavior, and associated constitution and laws. I'm going to take the politics out of it and just talk about the constitution and laws and jurisdictions of the various governmental units within the United States. So again, this is just quickly what I had just mentioned. Then we get into the public administration, which is the field in which leaders serve communities to advance the common good and effective positive change. It is equipping us with the skills to manage at all levels of government, whether it be federal, state, local. And when I say local, I take county out of that. So I'm actually showing 4 levels of government. So federal, state, county, local. Local, to me, includes city, school districts, and special districts. Again, federally, you're looking at the Constitution of the United States, divides it into three branches, your legislative, executive, and judicial. The federal legislative branch is made up of Congress, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. It was actually established by Article 1 of the Constitution. And the House of Representatives is made up of 435 elected members, divided amongst, obviously, there are 50 states and other territorial jurisdictions that the United States has, like American Samoa, Guam, and so forth. The presiding officer of the chamber is the Speaker of the House, elected by the representatives. He or she is third in line of the succession to the presidency. Members of the House are elected every 2 years. The House has several powers assigned exclusively to it, including the power to initiate revenue bills, impeach federal officials, and elect the president in case of an electoral college tie. The Senate is composed of a much smaller population. It's only 100 senators because there's 2 for each state. Senators' terms are staggered so that about a third of the Senate is up for re-election every 2 years. The Vice President serves as the President of the Senate and can act in a vote in order to break a tie. In order to pass legislation and send it to the President for his or her signature, both the House and Senate must pass the same bill by majority vote. And our current representative for our current jurisdiction is Senator Butler and Senator Padilla, and the Moreno Valley representative is Mark Takano. The executive branch, in essence, is just the president's cabinet. And so here this is showing the president, vice president, and the cabinet, obviously all the department heads of the various departments that are shown here. Obviously, there's a multitude of departments, very similar to the state and very similar to the county, very similar to what we have here locally. Sorry. All of the departments here obviously have their own budgets, have their own jurisdictions, and so forth. When you start taking a look at the judicial branch, it includes the Supreme Court and other federal courts. There are 9 justices that make up the current Supreme Court, 1 Chief Justice and 8 associated justices. And the federal courts generally have exclusive jurisdiction in cases involving 7 to 8 different areas: the Constitution, violation of federal law, controversies between states, disputes between parties from different states, suits between or against federal government, foreign governments and treaties, admiralty and maritime laws, and U.S. diplomats. The state, as we move into the state and move away from the Fed, is divided into almost the same 3 branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. All they differ in their makeup. California's first constitution was approved in 1849 and was published in both English and Spanish at that time. The legislature has 2 branches: the Senate Assembly, the State Assembly and the Senate. It is a 2-tiered body consisting of the lower house, which is the California State Assembly, with 80 members, and the upper house, which is the California State Senate, with 40 members. Again, very similar to the federal government. They have term limits and so forth, and their main focus is to draft legislation and enact state law. Our current senator for our jurisdiction is Richard Roth, and our state assembly member is Dr. Corey Jackson. This slide is very difficult to see, but in essence, this is the executive branch. So very similar to the president's cabinet, It's hard to believe that the state governor's cabinet is larger than the president's, but they just break it down differently, a multitude of different departments and levels and so forth. So I have included various links here to the California government website for agency search and the overall agency list, so people can actually see the various departments and so forth. But in essence, one thing that's interesting is when you look at some of the detail of this particular list, a lot of the departments that are inclusive of our state government has to do with education. You have various education, state boards of education for colleges, for state universities, for typical K through 12, and so forth. And then when you really get down to some of the departments that affect some of our residents other than education, you look at transportation agency. So Caltrans is a department within the state budget. And one thing to note with Caltrans is because it is a state department, the city has no jurisdiction to enter into the right-of-way on the highway, which includes all of the on and off ramps in the corridors. They also have various public health and aging, economic development departments and so forth. And so a lot of that then feeds to the various departments of the county as well, because it kind of mirrors what they're doing at the state. As we get into the county of Riverside, I just threw some information in here, historical information as to how Riverside County was developed and how it currently is set up. It's the fourth largest county in the state, and it's about 7,300 square miles. It was actually in 1893, it was officially formed and began charting a course for what is now Riverside County. Again, this just goes to show how fast some of the county has grown. And so over the last decade to actually about 2 decades, it has grown substantially. And so just various historical aspects of what the county is now. Kind of shows the org chart and the jurisdictions within the county itself, very similar to how I showed the state. But in essence, these are the departments and the structure of the county, as well as what their jurisdictional boundaries would be within these particular departments. The makeup of the Board of Supervisors, similar to our council. So their policy board, their supervisory districts are made up of 5 separate boundaries. And each of them obviously have been elected over time and rotate between various election years, so that not any more than the majority would actually be voted in or out in a particular year. This is the actual territory of Riverside County, from Orange County all the way to state line. But in essence, this is the district boundaries for each of the Board of Supervisors. As we get into the city of Moreno Valley and start specifically taking a look at how our city was developed and how our jurisdiction is formed, we incorporated in December 3rd of 1984. There were actually 3 cities that merged, which were Moreno, Sunnymead, and Edgemont. And the organization that we establish under is based on state of California, statutes of the state of California, and governed by the California Constitution. Currently, our city spans 51.3 square miles. Don't anticipate any annexations at this point to increase that. The city consists of 4 council members, as well as a directly elected mayor, selected at large. Each other than the mayor. Each of you have your own specific districts. The council duties include adopting ordinances, approving the budget, appointing committees, and appointing city manager, city attorney, and city clerk. In addition to the general city activities, council serves as governing body of all of the various entities that are listed on any given agenda when the mayor reads all those entities. The city manager is responsible for carrying out the policies and ordinances of the council, for overseeing the day-to-day operations of the city, and for appointing the heads of operating departments. We are a general law city. We are established under California Constitution. All California cities are municipal corporations, and their formation is provided under the Constitution. And they fall into three categories: general law, or charter cities, and then there's one consolidated city, which is San Francisco. It's a city and a county. Most of the cities in California are general law. And so that kind of establishes how our local laws are established through ordinances and so forth, and what our powers are. A charter city will have more local power than a general law city. When you look at the relationship between council and the city manager, so we have a council manager form of government. It shows what your responsibilities are, what their responsibilities are, and it's all formed through the general law establishment. But the city manager enforces the city laws and directs the daily operations, very similar to a lot of the cities in the state. This model has matured over time, but when you're looking at 483 cities and 4/5 of them are general law, as you can tell, there's not too many charter cities out there. Again, this just goes on to explain the form of government that we have for council manager. This is our organizational chart. Not quite as robust as some of the other charts that I've seen in here, but what it does is it breaks down all of the various entities that council oversees, and basically shows that citizens are at the top because that's what we're here for. And it breaks down all of our departmental operations, and a resident can see how our 11 departments break down into the various services that they receive. The way that local cities establish laws is through the municipal code. Every time an ordinance comes before you, obviously there has to be a first reading, second reading if approved, but once it is passed, it becomes municipal code, and these are the city laws in which we are able to enforce. That's the only jurisdiction in which you as a policy board have over the city. School districts are not part of that. This is our redistricting adopted plan from 2022. It shows your current districts within our territorial boundaries. When you look at the two school districts that service Moreno Valley, just real quick, wanted to show some information about each of the districts, their mission, vision, the equity, and so forth, and provide a link to their bylaws so that our residents can see what their rules and laws that they oversee in their jurisdiction are. This is actually a map of their school district, and as you can see, it overlays on the Moreno Valley jurisdiction as well. Although you do not have any ability to affect change to their bylaws and so forth, you do work and collaborate with their district from time to time. Valverde, again, is another district that services some of the city. Again, this is just an infographic as well as a link to their policies and bylaws. And this one district, only the northeast corner is actually in our city jurisdiction. The other aspect of local control is special districts and utilities. So although you might not have control over all of these particular districts other than Moreno Valley Utility Authority, all of these other utilities and various districts are outside of your purview of effectuation of change and so forth. So again, this lists all of the utilities for our residents. This is right off our website. With that, I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Brian. Go ahead and turn up to the dais here, see if there's any questions or comments. And first up, we have Councilmember Delgado.
Surprise, surprise. Brian, you kind of mentioned earlier too regarding Caltrans and their properties within the city of Moreno Valley, which, constitutes all highways and byways. The school districts, and they're obviously an entity within the city of Moreno Valley, and you saw all the schools, or you named all the schools, or you listed them. Properties within Caltrans, properties within school districts and the county, we can't get into effectively putting money or resources into making those better, because they are within the city, right? And if there's an eyesore, we as the city can't get involved in their properties, and the only thing we can do is communicate with them, right?
Yes, you are correct. So for any policy board that is within the jurisdictional boundaries within that make up the city, so you would have EMWD, you would have Box Springs Mutual Water District, you'd have MVUSD, Val Verde USD, some other special districts. Yes, you can. This policy board does not have any ability to effectuate any change on those particular policy boards or districts.
Because I've been working with Caltrans on a lot of the the under ramps, I get what they call underpasses, and it's hard. I mean, if we could just go out there and take care of it, it would be done a lot faster. And when we talked about that, we talked about a program where we come out there and we do it and we charge them, but then again, the liability aspect is greater than the benefit of just going and taking care of it. So we kind of backed off of that, but it's kind of frustrating because we don't have control of those properties or those areas within our city, and we would like to. We wouldn't like to have control of them, but we'd like to make them look better, because sometimes they're so busy, or whatever the reasons are, they're not paying attention to that, and it's difficult. So I just wanted to make sure. And the school districts are the same. We drive by a school, and they're responsible for the aesthetics, the landscape, the fencing, and all that, and sometimes they fall short. And I mean, in my opinion, they fall short. Whatever their budget woes or issues are, it is what it is, but it's kind of frustrating sometimes. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew and knows that, when it comes to other entities, properties, other entities, areas, that we don't have that control. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Next up, we have Mayor Pro Tem Bernard.
Brian, I would like to personally thank you for taking us back to school. You did a wonderful job breaking it all the way down. So my question is simply, the reports that we put out today, are they available as packaged online for residents?
Yeah, so typically what happens from a study session presentation, we do a few things. One, we send them to you as a policy board, so that in case your constituents are requesting them, you have them to be able to pass on. We also pass them through the executive and division managers The executive, one of them being obviously the city clerk, because it is part of the administrative record. So if anyone does want this, all they need to do is request from the city clerk any of these or any of our previous study sessions as well.
Thank you. And like I said, I completely appreciate you reminding me how Schoolhouse Rock worked.
Well, thank you. And I do appreciate all of the educators out there, because this was not my forte, but I enjoyed going back to school as well.
Yeah, I was waiting for that song to play of how a bill is made up on Capitol Hill. And say, I feel like I'm back at UCR studying poli-sci a couple years back, but really good information, Brian, always a good refresher. And just one question, there was a slide there about district boundaries for city council and board of soups. And just a couple years ago, we looked at, because of the census, we were right here in this chamber looking at district boundaries. So to that point and on that topic, is the city council allowed to change district boundaries, add council districts? Do we have that authority to do that?
Well, first, let me answer the requirement. Every 10 years, based on the census, we have to take a look at district boundaries, because every 10 years there is a process that the federal government goes through and counts. So that is when they have a good sense as to how many people are in each of your jurisdictions. So every 10 years we have to do that. Can a policy board change their jurisdictions or their district makeup? Yes. There was an effort, I believe in 2013-14, to potentially do that. But it has to go through certain requirements, as well as ensure that there's equity amongst the districts. There is definitely a process.
Thank you. And do you by any chance know off the top of your head how long, is it based on a certain number of months or days prior to an election that a governing body like the city has to make that decision? Or can you talk a little bit about timing and what the requirements are if the city wanted to add council districts, for example?
There is no requirement related to any given election. There is a requirement to ensure you follow a certain protocol, and the process is roughly 6 to 12 months to ensure that there's enough public outreach and engagement and so forth. And you would have consultants that are much smarter than us in dealing with district realignments. But if you recall, based on the every 10-year requirement, we did have a consultant assist with going through the federal government census count to ensure that there was still equity within the districts, as well as due to certain percentages increase, decrease of any given district, it was decided that it was proven that there was no change in the realignment of our current districts. Very similar process that we would have to go through. And so we went through probably a 6-month process in that particular round of review.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brian. Are there any further comments or questions from the dais? I don't see any. Before I move to adjourn, any other parts to item A2?
No, there are not. There are not.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. So unless there are any further questions or comments from the council, we'll go ahead and adjourn today's study session at 7:35 p.m. Have a good night, everyone.